Welcome to Haunted Horizons GhostCast with Alison Oborn, Craig Cameron and Cag Olwood from Haunted Horizons. Oops, I've given the game away. Tonight we're going to talk about time slips, and I just want to give you a little example of one that I've come across in Australia. In fact, in one of our venues that we operate from, the Adelaide Arcade. I was one day doing some research for the arcade at our state library when I got a phone call, strangely and coincidentally well timed. It was a gentleman who wanted to tell me about an experience he had had at the arcade. Now, he had been shopping with his partner, or his friend, should I say, and she was going to go and look for a wedding dress. It wasn't them that were getting married, but he was just with her. They were good friends. And she went off to the wedding dress shop, and he decided he would have a look around the arcade. Like most men, I guess. I don't know about all men, but most men, they really don't want to get dragged around the shops with us ladies. So he went off to a little area of the arcade, which is a museum. Now, as he was standing looking at the old artifacts of the museum, a gentleman came up towards him and stood beside him. He was dressed in a long overcoat, a fairly older man in his 50s. And as he was standing there, he asked, "What are you looking at?" To which the gentleman that phoned me said, "Well, I'm just looking at all these old things here." The man said to him, "Well, if you like old things, let me show you something." Now, at that point, I probably wouldn't have gone, but there you go. He was obviously feeling safe, so off he went. And they went downstairs, and they went to a room, and the gentleman got a key out and opened the room, and they stepped in. There in front of him was a very, very old generator. Now, this is where it got a little strange. The gentleman just stood there. He stopped talking. He just stood there, and he stared at the generator, not saying a word. Now, at this point, our gentleman started to get very, very kind of uneasy about it all. So he made his excuse. He said he had to go back to his friend, and he went back to the wedding shop. And his friend asked, "Well, what have you been doing while I've been doing this?" And he said, "Well, I was in the museum, and this gentleman came up to me, and he showed me the old generator here." Now, the person who works in the shop looked at him and said, "There isn't a generator here. The generator was removed a long time before." Now, he was determined to prove his point, so he took them down to this room where he had seen the generator. It was just an empty room. It was a shop. There was no generator there. But he swears blind that when he stepped into that room, it was a room with a massive great generator. For those who don't know the Adelaide Arcade, Francis Clooney, back in the 1887, was a beadle or a caretaker at the arcade, and unfortunately met with a tragic accident. He got caught up in the generator and was crushed. Apparently not the first time that the generator has been seen, or the generator room. Our security guard that takes us around says that has happened more than once. So could that be a slip in time? Did he see the generator room like it was 100 years ago? So tonight we're going to talk about time slips. Other names for it are temporal distortion, and also, here's going to be one, retrocognition. I had to have a look at that one because I hadn't really come across that one before. And to join us tonight, I'm going to bring on Cag, who is doing her Facebook at the moment. That's not Cag though, is it? But there you go, Cag's changed. 2021 hasn't got any better. Hello, Cag.
Hello, Alison. How are you?
You look a little different today.
To wear. It's been a long 12 days.
It's been a long 2021, hasn't it? There she is. And if you're wondering who the new look Cag is, That's Tony. So that's Cag's husband. And the reason we got Tony on tonight, because this is your real baby, isn't it? You're really fascinated in time slips and
Yeah, and to be honest, it's your fault. So look, to set the ground to begin with, I'm not an expert in quantum physics or anything exciting like that. But I'm just really interested in the phenomenon of time slips, and I guess in the early days of the Z Ward tours, when we used to get the guests and sit them in the day room before the tours to have a chat, you always gave a fascinating explanation of history and of the building, and also of the concept of ghosts and residual energies and intelligent hauntings. But you also told a specific story about time slips, and I think it was about the Roman soldiers who walked through a cellar in the treasurer's house in York, and were witnessed by an apprentice boilermaker, the boiler repairman. And that got me remember. I actually recall seeing that story, even though I think it happened in the early 1950s. I actually remember seeing a documentary about that when I lived in the UK, and so that brought back memories for me. And sort of being in the paranormal circles that I am with your good selves, I guess it rekindled the interest really, and also brought to mind a British sitcom. I don't know if you remember seeing it. It's probably after you left, Alison, called Goodnight Sweetheart, where there was a guy who slipped back in time.
I love that show.
London, yes. Yeah. So I guess the interest has always been there.
Yeah. Have you ever had one? Let me ask you that.
No, I haven't. I haven't. I mean, I have deja vu, I suppose, but I mean, I guess that's different. I've never actually witnessed anything from another time. No.
Yeah, love to though.
Oh yes.
And what about you, Cag? Just nodding your head there.
I've never witnessed anything. You'd think the amount of. Oh no! Tell a lie. Not actually visually had something happen. I know, sorry. Not visually, but audibly we have.
Yeah.
Haven't we? We had a really strange thing happen. So
with this thing here.
The Boo Bear.
The Boo Bear or the Boo Buddy. I don't think he works.
He's actually the Boo Bear. The Boo Buddy's the baby one.
Oh, is it?
Just to let you know.
I don't know. Anyway, I can't turn him on because Michael's taken all the batteries out, but he's a ghost hunting thing, and we got you bullied me into getting two, didn't you?
I did, because everybody else had them and we wanted them.
Yeah, this is what happens is they come to me and go, oh, can we have this, and they bully me. I buy these things and then they throw them to one side and they sit on the shelf forever.
Yeah, we don't like them anymore.
I don't like that now. But we had just bought a couple of these, and we used to have staff meetings down at Z Ward, one of our venues, and we'd had a staff meeting that day, hadn't we? Well, not the day that happened, and we were pretty not bored, but we thought we'd put both Boo Bears facing each other in the cell so they could talk to each other.
Which was amusing.
It was.
Yeah.
Talking to each other. And then what happened the week after? 2 weeks after?
Well, we went in. Did we do a tour or something? It was just a tour, wasn't it? Or something like that. There was no investigation. We had no equipment with us. But as we were in there, we could actually hear what sounded like the Boo Bears talking. But they weren't even in Z Ward. They were still in Alison's home.
No.
And that was just really weird. You could actually hear them talking away because they've got quite a unique voice. So,
well, I came out as well to start with, and then we both went in. I said, "You're going to think I'm weird," and you just look at me because you think I'm weird anyway. So
exactly. Yeah.
There's going to be no change on that one. And I've forgotten what did I say? It's I've just heard voice. Oh, that is the other thing. We heard voices as well.
Oh yeah, yes.
And I said, I've just heard voices in Z Ward, and there's nobody in there. We're all out here packing the car. And you looked at it, oh, well, that's interesting. They said, no, that's not the weird bit. I could hear the Boo Bears in there and talking, and we haven't got them with us. And it was just like, so I guess with time slip, if it's a time slip, I guess it doesn't have to be always visual. Could it be, we don't know how it works, could it be audio as well?
It's almost like our meeting was being
replayed.
Being replayed, wasn't it? It's really weird, very strange. But
And hello, everybody. Thank you for joining us.
And thank you, everybody, for the stars. Danielle, Linda, and Jeanette. Thank you so much for the stars.
Yeah, if you can keep an eye on that, Kat, because I can't see Facebook. I'm not on Facebook.
No,
technically, I am on StreamYard. So thank you, everybody, for supporting us with that. I can't see.
Thank you. I do have another one. Then I'd like to say just before we get Tony to unleash Tony with all these different stories. I used to work in Mount Barker. Natasha, thank you, Natasha. It's very kind of you.
Oh, thank you, Natasha.
Now, I used to park in the nearby petrol station and used to go in or go past to say hello to the ladies that worked in there. And one afternoon I arrived for work and they weren't very happy with me because I suppose I'd been in that morning. I hadn't gone in to see them. And they weren't happy. And I'm like, but I didn't work this morning. I don't work in the mornings. I work in the afternoons. And she goes, no, we saw your car. And I actually had an orange Fiesta Sport. So it was bright orange and with a red number plate with CAG on it. Thank you, Susie. Thank you so much. And they swore blind. They saw it. It came in. They parked up. And then it disappeared later on. And then I came back in the afternoon. They swore blind what they saw. So it's not like it's a car they could mix up with somebody else's.
No. How weird.
Very strange.
So Tony, so you've been looking into this.
Yes.
I know you've been interested in it for a long time. So I know you've been kind of looking into it for a long time. So what's the most famous case that you know of?
Probably the most famous is an example, a story where two English women, just after the turn of the last century, so 1901, went on a holiday to France, and they were walking in the gardens of the Palace of Versailles. And they were trying to find a small, basically a small chateau, little chateau in the gardens of Versailles. That was given by the king at the time, which I think was Louis the 16th, to his young wife, Marie Antoinette, as a private retreat within the grounds for her personal use. Now, these two women weren't just tourists, they were quite respected. One was the principal of a college and another one was a teacher at that college. So they were what you might consider reliable witnesses. What happened was, as they were wandering through the grounds, they actually found themselves amongst people who were in dress of a completely different period from the 1780s, actually the time that Marie Antoinette was there. They thought it was a bit odd, but they were carrying out fairly normal duties. They didn't quite understand what was happening. They passed structures that they subsequently discovered hadn't existed since round about that time. And they actually eventually found themselves at the little chateau in the grounds. And they believed they had an encounter with Marie Antoinette herself, who was sat within the grounds of her little chateau, sketching the scenery. It was only when they were approached by a contemporary tour guide that was actually from 1901, that the two women suddenly found themselves back in that time again. What's interesting was that they didn't actually speak to each other a lot about their experience, but they agreed they'd both experienced something unusual, and they both went back home, went to their own separate homes, and wrote down their experiences. And later, of course, they were able to compare them. And there's actually a book called The Adventure, or An Adventure,
Oh, you've got it.
I have indeed, yes, which is quite a fascinating read, and it does compare the two versions of what happened, and the details of the attire and the dress that people were wearing, the details of the buildings have subsequently been proven to be correct for the time. So to all intents and purposes, they did actually see things that would have been around in 1789. And of course, it can't be explained. There was lots of stories and people making up things, I guess, at that time and since then about time travel. But what made this particularly interesting was sort of the credibility of the two witnesses in this case.
Yeah, I believe they were quite well educated.
Absolutely. One was the principal of the college, and a few years later, the other one actually took over the same role as principal of the college. So not just two old dears on a holiday.
I believe, yeah, exactly. I believe Mobley, which is one of the ladies, wasn't it her father that was the president for is it? What's the uni? It's a very well known one. Winchester? No, that's not right. I don't know. Big unis in England, but her father was one of that, and he became a bishop as well, I believe.
Okay.
They were very well respected ladies.
Yeah. Yeah.
Now, I don't know if you've followed up on the natural causes that people come up with for what they experienced. So I'll ask you first about the poet, Robert de Montesquieu. I can't remember his name. He's a poet, a French poet. And he used to have parties. Excuse me, I never remember French names, so you're just going to have to shoot me. He used to have parties, they said. Now, they believed, as an excuse, that they said that this is what they were experiencing. They must have experienced one of these parties, because at the parties they used to have fancy dress and they used to get dressed up like the 1700s. And it does sound credible. There's no evidence that he had a party on that day or that time. But the thing that was interesting to me that would say, wow, well, they knew about structures. There were structures there that weren't there in 1901 that they couldn't have known about. And one becomes a question mark. People try to dismiss it as a natural thing that these two very well-educated ladies just happen to not know the difference between a party and a fancy dress and something a little more unusual. So, but yeah,
and there was an interaction, wasn't there, as well, between them and one of the people, one of the guards who was dressed in the period uniform, helping them point in the right direction.
Yes, which is interesting because it would mean that whoever they were actually acknowledged them as well.
Yes,
which from what I believe in a time slip is quite unusual. It's almost like we're not seen. So yes, yeah.
So there's another interesting story that also takes place in France, but much more recently. It's 1979. Two British couples, the Simpsons and the Gisbys, were actually travelling through France en route to a holiday in Spain. And it was getting quite late. They were looking for somewhere to stay, and they hit the French town of Montélimar. They tried one or two hotels on the main drag and found they were full, but they eventually came across an extremely old-fashioned looking hotel down a side street, and they thought they'd give it a go because all the other hotels were full. They found the surroundings basic but extremely comfortable. The locals were dressed in sort of unusual clothing for the period, but because it was rural France, I guess they didn't think too much about it. But the next day when they came to leave, the whole bill for the hotel and the stay only cost 19 francs. Now, this is 1979, so that wasn't an awful lot of money. That was for both couples, the entire stay. So they thought there'd been an error in the bill, and as any honest person would, they just upped and left, thinking that they'd sort of struck it lucky for that particular day. So wishing to try their luck again on their way home back from Spain, They also stopped in the village of Montélimar and tried to find the hotel, but they couldn't locate it. It quite simply wasn't there anymore. When they got home, they had the films developed, because that was in the days of films, photographs on a film camera for holidays. And the photos that they'd taken of the hotel had disappeared. The negatives were blank, and obviously they couldn't get any prints off them. So that was another experience in France, a much more recent one. But what I find interesting, and I guess this is the auditor in me coming out, is that in both of those instances, the couples knew each other, and the two women from the Versailles experience knew each other. So, it's not beyond the realms of feasibility that they could have corroborated the stories. Mm-hmm. Although, particularly when having read the book for the Versailles experience, that the amount of detail that's captured is quite extraordinary.
Yeah, they wrote it under a different name as well, didn't they?
It is, yeah, that's right. Yeah.
So, people say, what motive would be behind it? But I guess if you're writing a book and then you don't put it under your name because you're going to get mocked for it, people could come forward and say, well, they wrote that book just to make money. And then they don't get the fall back on it,
And of course, we've got respected professions to protect as well.
Yeah, exactly. So now, while I was writing, I am writing your questions down, guys, because the questions.
Oh, so was I. I was writing.
Oh, well, is that what you're doing too? Yeah. If I put my head down or across, it's because I'm writing.
Yeah, I'm taking notes, Abby. Yeah, so cool.
We're just going to say a quick hello to everybody who's joined us. We don't want to keep saying hello to you because obviously it interrupts the flow of the live stream. So just know that we're all happy you're here. Debbie Williams, thank you so much. You put up the name Montesquieu, I think his name was, and links, which is awesome. Go and follow those links. Yes, I was right. It was Winchester College in Oxford.
Yeah, so thank you for that, Rosemary. Sure.
The Ninji, I saw your comment, and actually I have that in my notes, Ninji, on that. And that's another thing that people bring up as well. And I don't know what you guys think of this, that it is well known that illicit drugs can cause that same thing to happen. And of course, people don't expect drugs to be around, illicit drugs to be around back then. But Kag, you did the hospital tour.
Oh, and yes.
You were teaching on some of the drugs that were in our medications.
Oh, they were just unbelievable. To have morphine and heroin and you name it, it was in drugs. So even if you purposely weren't taking anything like that, you were actually taking it because it was in the drugs anyway, in your medications. So
cough medicine.
Yeah, cough medicine. I mean, heroin was used as a cough suppressant, so
Wasn't heroin? Was it heroin or cocaine that was used for teething?
It's cocaine for teething,
teething baby. So Ninja does bring up a good point because I actually had that in my notes. Thank you, Ninja. I was going to bring it up later, but you don't know. Drugs.
I've got two other ones.
You got two other ones.
Yeah, power of suggestion and deja vu.
Yes, power of suggestion I had down. That was Kirsty.
Yeah.
The photos, there are no photos of the generator. So what he was looking at was old newspaper articles. We're going back to the Adelaide Arcade, by the way, just for those who wonder where I jumped back to. It was that original story of the arcade about the generator. Now, there is no photographs of the generator in that place. There's nothing really. There's only a tiny little newspaper article on a wall, and that's it. But he was looking in the cases, which are like things they found, like dolls and old newspaper stuff.
Yeah.
And so the power of suggestion probably wasn't there. It was daytime as well. The arcade was packed out. So, and as for what's the other one?
Deja vu.
Thinking of the Boo Bears was the other one. I'm just looking at Kirsty's first. I preferably don't don't think about the Boo Bears. They're not my most favourite thing. So they definitely weren't on my mind when we were hearing it. As I said, I was hearing somebody talking like they were having a meeting in the hallway. It was almost like I was hearing my own staff meeting from 2 weeks earlier. And I don't think about my meetings afterwards. It's just like we'd had 2 weeks of tours in between. So, but you're right, power of suggestion could be in some cases. You know, we can't dismiss that. And I wasn't on illicit drugs either, Ninji. All right. Before Ninji brings that one up. I am clean. Well, apart from the whiskey, other times. So yeah, you know, we don't know what was in it. Well, we do know what was in our medication, so it is a well-known thing. So I'm glad you've got a copy of that, Tony. Where did you find that book?
I think I got it off Booktopia.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I've got one or two books actually. There's one that I'm reading at the minute.
Oh.
And then one, a lot of them just recount the same stories, actually. This is by a woman, Catherine Fletcher. She's got a fair bit out there at the minute.
Okay, that's cool. Because I've got some other cases, and one was in Penrith, the Brecon Beacons. And I think this was right back, well, it wasn't that far ago, really. I'm going to talk some modern ones. It was back in the 70s when she was younger. She used to go walking up there with a friend. And here's another case. I mean, I would hope she's not on illicit drugs. She was only a teenager back then. Who knows? But they'd done the walk several times. They're walking up, and as they were coming around this bend in the forest of the Brecon Beacons, they said it suddenly felt really weird. And this is another thing I keep hearing, is just before it happens, there seems to be a change in the atmosphere a little bit. She said it's almost like when a thunderstorm is due. It gets that real heavy feel, that charge feel. It's a different feel. And she said that was their first inclination that something was going to be different. And they came around the corner. They were just chatting. They came around the corner, and there was a stone cottage right in front of them, from the medieval times, which they never remembered being there before. And they said there was smoke coming out the chimney, so it was obviously somebody in there. And they kind of stood there. They said when the door opened, that's when they ran. They were terrified. They ran. And she said they've been back many times, and the stone cottage isn't there anymore. It isn't there. So something from the you know, she described it like an old, very basic stone cottage from the medieval times, and somebody in it. So there's more modern ones as well.
Mm.
Yes, I'm quite interested in one from Liverpool. It's another quite well-known case. Liverpool's Bold Street. There's a particular area of Liverpool which seems to be quite a hot spot for time slip experiences. This one happened in 1996, so yeah, definitely fairly recent. What makes this credible is that it's an ex-copper or an off-duty copper at the time who was shopping with his wife. His wife wanted to go into a clothes shop, and he just wanted to pop somewhere else. On his way back, he happened to bump into a friend, was chatting for a while, and when he left him, he went to aim for Waterston's bookstore. Am I back?
You're back now.
All right.
You're back.
Okay. They'd agreed to meet in Waterston's bookstore. So he went to what was Waterston's bookstore, was about to cross the road, and almost got run over by an old van, which looked very odd. The van beeped its horn to warn him, and he sort of stepped back because he suddenly found himself in the middle of the road. As he approached what he thought was Waterston's bookstall, it had a sign outside saying Crips. And that's where he stumbled across a young woman in about her 20s, so somebody that he didn't know, who was also looking a little bit puzzled. They sort of approached the bookstore what should have been the bookstore together, went in, and were both quite surprised to find that it was a clothes shop. And they sort of went out again, and things had returned to normal. They were back in 1996. They both acknowledged to each other what they thought they'd seen, and yeah, the guy basically never shut up about it since. They subsequently did some research. There was a name on the van that almost ran the guy over, Kaplan's. That was actually a company that was in Liverpool at the time, and they would have had vans on the roads. And there was a Cripps store, clothing store. It's sort of a bit of a department store at the time. An interesting point to that is there were apparently nobody can find out exactly where it was and whether it was Waterstones, but I guess that was just the research at the time.
Yeah.
But what interests me from there is that these are two people who didn't know each other, so there was no benefit to either of them in corroborating each other's story. So that clearly indicates that there was something unusual happening to the two of them, and for him for the guy Frank to discover this girl also looking a little bit puzzled and perplexed at the time is quite interesting. I think it's also interesting to think. The guy in the van, what did he see? He must have seen something. He honked his horn. And somebody has thought about it from the perspective of, is there anything reported that in the department store, some strangers that were dressed in a very unusual way were reported as going in on that time? Because that would have been fascinating to have had a story from the other side of it, captured in, whatever time it was, the 1950s. Nothing's been found, but it's quite interesting because that's so there's nothing in to either of them to gain in terms of making up a story and corroborating each other's evidence in that respect. Yeah. But I think it's interesting that same place in Liverpool, that area has had a number of stories about it. So
I've heard a couple. As I said, I think that if I remember rightly, when they walked into the shop is when it changed. So maybe the people in the shop didn't have time to see them. But it is interesting that the truck actually beeped his horn. Now, was he beeping at somebody else? Or was it Frank was in the way and he wanted to get out of the way? And it seems strange to me that we haven't had those reports of future people.
Yes, yeah.
People dressed in strange future clothes. It always seems to be in reverse.
Yes, so, that's right, yeah.
You would have thought we'd have it the other way as well.
And that's a story where the time slip, if that's what it was, isn't that far back. It was only sort of 40 years previously. We talked about it being in the 50s, maybe the 60s, whereas the others that we've looked at have been quite a lot further back in time. So the Versailles Incident went back over 100 years, and the people, the two couples that were in France, they described it as being sort of at the end of the 1800s, that sort of turn of century dress. So that's quite a time, quite a point in time, quite a gap. Yeah. Whereas the Liverpool one's quite contemporary.
There was also one CAG from Haddon Hall. I'm just trying to.
Haddon Hall.
But if you haven't looked it up, Haddon Hall is in my hometown in England, just on the outskirts. And CAG and me were only there. Was it last year or the year before? Oh no, it can't be last year.
It
wasn't last year. We
didn't go anywhere last year. Gosh, we did the year before when we could. And Haddon Hall it's the architecture is beautiful. It's really old. You go in there and it still feels very medieval, doesn't it?
Oh yeah.
And there was a lady. She actually is a ghost hunter, Joan Foreman. She had gone in there not to look for ghosts or anything. She'd just gone in, and as she was in there, she was in the yard, the courtyard, just admiring the architecture like we did. We went in just to have a look at the architecture and the place, and she said she saw some children playing on the top of the steps, and one girl in particular who was aged about 9, and she said she had long blonde hair or shoulder length blonde hair, dressed in an old Dutch type white hat and I think on top of my memory, long green silk dress. And then they disappeared. Now, she was determined, because she believed she had seen this. So she was determined to try and find out whether this child was anything to do with the families that had lived there. And she was looking at all the portraits and everything else. And she came across, I'm just going to shut this door because Michael's coming with the shopping. All I can hear is bags, rustling bags. And she actually did find a portrait, and it was of Lady Grace Manners, who lived in the 1600s. So she actually found the person. But yeah, she said it was there, the children were playing, and then suddenly, bang, they were back to normal. We didn't have that, though. Very disappointed, Keg.
No, we don't get that, do we?
No. So I had to bring up our hometown one.
Yeah.
But what is it that triggers these events?
I don't know, and I don't think anybody knows. It's there are a lot of stories coming up from these guys, though. What we'll do is we'll go back. Hopefully, Keg's taking notice of them. We will go back and we'll read out some of your tales and your stories. I think one of the most looked at is actually, it was in the Smith. I can never say this without stuff. The Smithsonian magazine. That's the one. And it was about three Navy cadets who were 15 years old, and they were on a map reading exercise, the three of them, down in Suffolk. And they came over the hill, or down the hill, and into a village. Now, when they came into this village, I'm just Kersey, that's it. They came into this village. It was really weird, they said, because it was very quiet and there's no people. Absolutely nobody. And it looked really, really old. And the one thing that they noted was there was no wires, this is in the 50s, so 1950s. There was no modernization for the 50s. It was just very old. And they said they went up to the very first building, looked into it, and it was a butcher's shop. And there was carcasses, but the carcasses were green and mouldy. And they were thinking, well, that wouldn't be. And then there's been another house, and it was completely empty. And at this point, they started to get really, really nervous, and they went back up the hill away from it. And then suddenly they could hear the bells of a church, but they hadn't seen a church when they're in the village. Usually you can see the churches, their steeples are quite high.
Yeah.
And then everything seemed to pick up again. The birds were singing, and they could hear the bells, and everything went back to normal. And the interesting thing is, two of them witnessed this. The third one can't remember any of it. He can remember being there, but he can't remember the strangeness, which is really bizarre. So was it just their imaginations? Was it just that they went in? But they said it wasn't early in the morning. It wasn't like everybody should be asleep and stuff like that. But yeah, but that's in the Smithsonian magazine. And the guys right up to it, they said that they swore by it, that this is what happened, even years and years later. So I
remember when I was hearing your stories in Z Ward, you mentioned that the new theory at the time was that rather than time being like a continuum, there's lots of time streams, I guess, happening at the same time. So sometimes, maybe we come a little bit close. I came across a variation of that theme while I was looking at it, and that's rather than being linear, time is perhaps like a meandering river. And therefore, yes, fluid. And as it sort of curls back on itself, that's the bit at which, perhaps the difference between what was in the past and where we are now is very thin. And that's why you see the Roman soldiers, because it happens to coincide with that.
Yeah. It clips. I always said, maybe, could it be possible? I'm not saying this is how it works, because I don't do physics, but this is where we need to go. All right. But, sometimes I do wonder, do we just get glimpses of the past because the past is still happening around us?
Yeah. And again, do they? You made an interesting point that there's no records of anybody from the past seeing into the future.
Yeah. Well, this is or seeing the future people.
Yes. Yeah.
Although I'm going to bring up a little something here, which may, I don't know. My sister, she used to be a teacher, so I'm going to bring up something else here. And she went into work. She went to school. And she used to go in early so she could get her stuff ready for the day. And she went into the schoolyard as she walked in towards the school. And she said she saw the school and nearly all the windows were broken. So she assumed that vandals had been in and smashed the place. But then suddenly it wasn't. Suddenly it was back to how it should be. A week or two after that, the school was vandalized and all the windows were broken.
Oh.
Could she have seen the future?
The future.
Because we don't see, this is what I mean, we're not seeing the future. This is our argument. We're not seeing anybody like you and I. There's not many reports about seeing the future. But was she seeing that clip in time where she got a glimpse? She's not psychic or anything. So it's not that she was prophesizing it. So, but maybe.
So that explains deja vu.
Who knows? Well, deja vu, they do say there is, well, whether it all is that something our brain does, but who knows? It might not answer it all. So, but there you go. Planes as well. That's another thing. I don't know if you remember when you were living in Yorkshire, CAG.
Nottinghamshire. I didn't live in Yorkshire. No,
still kind of
Yorkshire.
Yorkshire. All right. In the Peak District, love.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Phantom planes.
Yorkshire,
when I was growing up as a teenager, there was always stories about ghost planes. Like bombers and from World War II and stuff like that. And people were seeing them and they'd just disappear. And we do know that there was a lot of crashes during that time up on the moors. I think 300 people lost their lives over all those crashes up there. In fact, I went up to go and find one. And it was eerie. We did find the remains of one of those bombers. And it's 13 crew members lost their life. And it's very eerie. It takes a lot of finding and getting up there, but it's eerie because all the bits of the plane are still there.
Oh,
but,
wow.
You know, could people be seeing the bombers still flying because of that slip? It's not a ghost plane. How can planes be ghosts? But are they seeing the flight? But on the other hand, could we like to give both sides of the argument here? Whenever they've been seen, the RAF does say, well, yeah, you know, we were flying a bomber around that area around that week. So probably are. So who knows? But yeah, it's in fact Wittering, RAF Wittering, they've got a well-known story there because one of the people that worked there, this is going back to the 50s. It's always around about the 50s, isn't it? Around about the 50s, he actually saw a plane coming in and the landing wheels didn't come down. So it came gliding in and he was fully expecting to hear it hit the tower. And instead it just disappeared. It didn't hit the tower. And apparently this is common there, that they're seeing the plane coming in. Either it hits the tower and crashes or it just disappears before it hits the tower. And there was apparently a crash there. A plane in World War II era did hit that tower and there was crew members lost. So we can't go into investigate that, CAG. I looked.
okay.
Apparently the tower is haunted as well.
Oh, was it?
But I looked. It's still being used by the RAF. It's still in use. I can't get there. Sorry.
Not good.
Yeah, some interesting stories. There really is. Oh, I've got 2 Australian ones for you. You know, Australian stories. And one I do know about, the art gallery. I think I've heard about that one on North Terrace.
Oh, no.
The art gallery, very many moons ago, I think it was about 2005, off the top of my head. ABC had done a story on the ghosts in the art gallery, and they contacted us because we were the paranormal team at the jail, and they wanted us to go in. We never did. Story short, we never did. We went into the jail instead. But one of the stories from the art gallery was of security guards that were working there. And one night they opened the back doors because they were going to go out and have a smoke and just check on things. And when they opened the back doors, they said suddenly out the back, instead of seeing the uni and everything else, which is out the back, all they saw was scrub, bush, how it would have been back in the day before settlers.
Wow.
And then they shut the door and just looked at each other, opened the door again, it was back to normal.
Ooh.
So that one from Adelaide. So there you go. That one is on the ABC. The other one is the well-known one here, is the Barossa Valley. So a man and his wife and family were coming to Adelaide. They had just come to a place near Kapunda, Allendale North, I think it was, that they were coming through just before you get to Kapunda. And the pub there, they could see. Oh, I can hear myself. Somebody's got I can hear an echo. Might be on tone, feeding back into the microphone.
Have you got your phone on?
No, not my phone.
Oh, isn't it?
No.
On speakers. Let me just mute you. Okay, let me talk now. Yeah, it's Tony. So it must be coming through. Can you turn your volume down on your speakers a little bit, maybe? It might just be a bit loud and it's feeding back through. So yeah, they were coming through Allendale. His wife was asleep, and that's better, Tony. As they were coming through, he could see in the distance by the pub a whole load of people. And as he got closer, he thought maybe it was a fete or a fair because they were all dressed in older 1800s clothing. So as he drove through, he realized there was a buggy and a horse, and these people were kind of there. Only one person looked at him as he drove through, and that was a little boy who was holding the hand of his mother. And the little boy just stared right at him and watched the car. Nobody else took any notice at all of what was happening. And then as he got through, his wife started to stir, and he happened to look up in the rear view mirror. The street was empty. And that was in our own Barossa Valley.
Cool.
There you go.
I like. Mm.
So the fact that was a child is quite interesting, isn't it? Because that's, children are supposed to have very few preconceptions because they learn habits and how things are in the real world, I guess, as they grow up. So, is it feasible if the child was the only one that looked at him, his mind was open to seeing that? Yeah.
Well, they say children can see things, so maybe, yeah. I haven't heard any stories from a child or a grown-up now who said, hey, when I was a child and I was at Allendale and we were just outside the pub and this really weird thing came by. I never thought you would have heard about that. I'm sure somebody would be in the pub telling that. So don't know. It's all very, very interesting, but not just to do with the overseas in England.
Yeah.
In fact, I'm looking now and there's people putting up stories here about.
Yeah, they are. Just want to say thank you to Lynn and Jenny, by the way. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn and Jenny. Have you been taking notice of some of the stories, or?
Yes, Teresa's on the back Murray Bridge. They have a ghost train in Murray Bridge.
Oh, I wonder if that's the one we hear going past Tail and Bend during our tour.
The ghost train.
I always crack the joke. Oh, it's all right. It's just a ghost train. Yes. And, it'd be hard. It's funny, the trains and the ships and the planes, to say, because it's an inanimate object. So to say it's a ghost would probably be wrong. It would probably make more sense that it was just, we're seeing a glimpse of something.
Yeah. We've clicked. So definitely, I like the idea of the fact it's clicked and we've seen things. But it's like I say, it's interesting how we're not having reports of seeing people in the future.
So what do we think a time slip is? So what are your thoughts? Because there's lots of different thoughts. That it's a clip into a different era, like we've just said. Another one is, well, maybe it is ghosts, but they're just creating in our mind their environment. So we're seeing their environment. That's another one. I'm not saying any of this is right. Hallucinatory drugs, obviously, has been known. But are all these people on drugs? There is actually a psychological condition, derealization, and it's when you're in the real world, but the world doesn't seem real, and it is actually a condition of the brain. So could it just be that our brain, we feel we're in the real world, but it's not real, if you like?
Yeah.
And as you say, time isn't fixed, but it's fluid. So what are your thoughts? We'll go around.
What intrigues me about it, for those who have seen like the shadow figures at the NRM, for example, or Tailem Town. Excuse me, Tom, could you let that dog out, please? Oh. Okay. Sorry. The dog is desperately in need of outside. Those are, where we see figures in a different context, like Tailem or the NRM.
Yeah.
Is that a time slip of a sort of a very limited type? Because at that point, particularly if it's a shadow or a figure that's hiding between the trains, for example, are we seeing something that happened in the past, or is that a completely different phenomenon altogether?
Yeah, well, that's the thing, because it's seen on the platforms, isn't it? In fact, a couple of times it's been seen getting off trains. Now, the platforms are still there, or a couple of the platforms are still there. So could it be just we just see the rest of the environment with it as well? If it's not just the figure, you would think that you would,
and why is it
everything
repeated?
would change.
And why do we see them time and again, maybe doing different things? Whereas sort of some of the top, like Versailles, for example, that was a one-off. That was an instance that happened at a point in time. They did go back in the future, and it didn't repeat. But when we go to the venues that you have, often there's almost a relationship, isn't there, between the guides and some of the characters that you see.
You get very, very fond of it. Yeah, actually, Abby brings up a good point. Instead of us slipping into the past, are they slipping into the future?
That is an interesting point. Yes. Yeah.
They're slipping into our time. But they don't seem aware of us. That's the one thing that comes up again and again, apart from the little boy. And it could have been coincidence that the truck actually beeped its horn at that point.
Yeah.
They seem these people are experiencing it. Always say that mostly the people that are around them from that time are not aware of them. It's almost like we're seeing through a window into something.
Yeah.
That we're not physically there where we can be seen.
Yes. Yeah.
So
I'm with Nicole. Nicole says, I think we will all drive ourselves insane if we delve too much into it. It's like trying to understand the concept of space and whether space ends or it is infinite. Yeah.
I agree, Nicole. We go round and round in circles. It's an interesting subject, though, so we had to bring it up.
It is. It's a fascinating subject, and to know that we've got a lot of old stories and we've got a lot of newer ones, and we've got some actually related to even Adelaide itself.
We actually had
one of our venues.
We actually had a story this morning, if you go to the Haunted Horizons page, about is it the main beach, main shorefront? She didn't put too many details, but where she saw a whole lot of people from the past there and felt very privileged as well.
Right. It would be a fantastic thing to witness, though, wouldn't it?
Yeah. I have yet to really witness it. I have yet to walk into a stately home or I just see a crowd of people going about their business. And I think that would be
how many old buildings we go into.
exactly. And you and I never have it.
No, and like Ted and I, we've always gone when we lived in the UK. We used to travel around and go to all these old buildings. We never had that happen either, did we?
No.
No. Maybe only certain people can have it. Who knows? So
yeah.
We've got any other questions before we wind up? We've done well. We've an hour on this.
Yeah, Ash has sent something through for you.
Okay.
I don't know if you've seen it.
I haven't been reading the comments because it's hard.
Time traveling hipster. This has been circling the internet since 20. Oh, okay.
I like the Doctor Who, the timey-wimey. What should I call it that he goes on about?
Yes, that was pretty cool.
Timey-wimey things. I'm going to open this door whether my husband's making noise or not because I am dying. Look at my face, it's gone bright red. 32 degrees. Oh, air conditioning coming in. That's nice. So
I've actually got something that I should have. Tony be able to show it to you. We have got.
Well, now
we have got.
What are you going to show me, Tony?
It's actually Tony right next to you. There's a little sign that we're going to put up. Yeah, on the table, love.
Oh, yes. Which one? Oh, yes. Yes. So this is for the front of our house.
What's that one?
Jacob Van Hoffman, inventor of time travel, lived here in 2189.
I love it.
You see? How cool is that?
I love it. That's awesome.
That'll confuse the neighbours.
Who's that? And you just leave it up there forever. Yeah, that'll confuse them. Buy it as well.
Yeah.
All right. Well, we are coming up to nearly the end. 3 minutes. So,
and it's been pretty cool. There's been
some
great stories.
You've been really quiet on your thoughts on it all. I mean, Tony.
No, Ma, I'm with.
Ultimately, do you think that time slips could exist?
Yes, I do actually. And you know me, I'm normally.
Wow.
I don't believe this, and I don't believe in. I know there's a lot of things I don't believe in, but I think we've had some weird things happen. That it could possibly be that time slips. That to me is more logical, I think, than a lot of the things that we come across. A lot more than we never used to
just be on drugs then.
Yeah, there could well be, but every single person. I really don't know. Maybe they are because there are a lot of people are nowadays.
Cough medicine's good stuff.
Cough medicine is good stuff. Yeah. But to me, it's more interesting and more logical than the stone tape theory.
Oh, where the building. I must admit, for me, I'm probably going to go with you on that one. That I would stone tape theory that the building just holds on to it and replays it like a tape recorder. Possibly. They do say that sandstone and the quartzy crystals can do that. We use quartz in radios and stuff like that. Not being a physicist, I'm not even going to go into the physics and stuff like that. I'm not even going to pretend to be intelligent on this, okay? But from a layman point of view, yeah, it would make more sense. If we had a choice between the two, it would make more sense to me as well. I'll be with you on that maybe we're just hearing the past.
And Nicole, that's one of the things I actually say on my tour. We won't know until we're dead, and then it's too late. We won't know how it works until then.
Yeah.
Then it's too late to let anybody know.
Exactly. Well, I think our time is up. We've been on for an hour, so... And here's me thinking, every time I come on, I'm going, I don't know if we've got enough to talk about. Everybody is thanking Tony. Thank you so much, Tony, for taking the time to come on tonight.
Thank you for inviting me. It's been an interesting opportunity. Thank you.
Nice to have a fresh mind on this, and we'll have to get you on again when you've read all the other books.
Okay.
And we'll put a list of books up underneath.
Yeah, actually, that would be good. That would be good if we could if you could get hold what you've enjoyed, Tony, what you think is worth reading, and then we can put some books. We should have a book club thing going where we can review books.
Should do. Yeah, that'd be interesting.
A bit of light reading. So, all right. Well, thank you so much, Tony. I am going to go get some tea because I haven't eaten yet, and I guess you and Kag have.
Yes,
you did. You fed your husband. That's very good of you.
Of course. Yes, have to keep him happy.
We have a woofie needing walkies.
Well, that's important as well. All right. Well, thanks a lot, and we will see you again. Who knows when? Because we don't have traditional times. It's just when we're not working, we will come on. Choose a subject.
Very rare.
We just go, hey, let's go on. Then we've got a night off. It's could be any time, but we will put up the warning for it 24 hours before. All right, you lot take care, and we will see you next time.